Aloha and welcome to Inside the Writer's Studio. I'm your host, Isla Allgood, and I'm excited today to have Jim Gibbons reading with us. He's going to be reading something from his book, and then we're going to have some talk story to get to know Jim as a writer. Please welcome Jim.
I'm Jim Gibbons, a writer, and I'm going to read something from a book that most of the stories have been published before because I had a column for years, but the book it's on Amazon. It's an ebook right now, but the paperback should be coming out soon. Okay, so I'm going to read. It's a running book. I had a running column for years. Okay, it's the World Veteran Games in Eugene, Oregon. This is from 1989. I don't know how many bowls of Wheaties I had when I was a kid, but I do remember eating them while staring at the Olympic decathlon champion, Bob Richards. His picture on the box under the motto, Breakfast of Champions. Yes, the 1952 and 56 Olympic champion Bob Richards, who adorned Wheaties boxes from 1957 to 1970, must have inspired plenty of kids back then. He certainly inspired me. I could always run faster, jump higher, do more push-ups after eating a bowl of Wheaties. It didn't surprise me when I read in the Eugene Register Guard that Richards, now 63, of course this is 1989, was still competing. But it did surprise me to read that he's traveled more than 14 million miles and given more than 14,000 motivational speeches. He is an original American hero, but today our hero had a pained look on his face, suggesting that things weren't going all that well. An old leg injury caused him to drop out of the decathlon and concentrate on the pole vault, his best event, and he was struggling. He ended up second to a Brit. Richards was just one of the nearly 5,000 athletes from 60 countries in every state in the U.S. in the track and field capital of USA, the host to the first World Veteran Games ever held in the United States. Eugene, after all, is a city that brought you Steve Prefontaine, Mary Decker, Alberto Salazar, Bill Dellinger, and Nike shoes. Where else can they pack the stands for a track meet? What other city has a pizza place called Track Town Pizza? I had brought my two boys, Eli and Riley, who were used to driving up and down the coast with me to track meets, road races, and cross-country meets. Usually they'd compete, but this meet was only for men over 40 and women over 35. This was not the first adult-only track meet I brought them to. We came to Eugene for the National Masters meet back in '84 after I turned 40, and they were happy to join me again. Even though we spent hours at the University of Oregon's Haywood Field during the 6 days we were there, I still miss a lot of my Tamalpa teammates' races, because every race had so many heats in each 5-year age division, all the way up to 90 plus. And because there were no qualifying standards, some events were packed with many heats before the winners advanced to the finals. We're talking about the biggest track and field meet in the world, held at 4 different locations around town. I was entered in 2 events, the men's 45 to 49, 5,000 meters, that's 3.1 miles, and the 1,500 meters, the metric mile. Unfortunately, the 5K had 5 heats, and I was not in the last fastest heat, which included both the American and world record holders. That meant I wouldn't have the luxury of being pulled along, but instead would have to push the pace, unlike the shorter races, the 1,500 meters and under. The heats in the 5 and 10K, that's 3 and 6.2 miles, were also the finals. What made it worse was I'd been wanting to go under 16 minutes since I turned 40, and this would have been my best chance. I talked to 2 runners I had beaten before who got in the fast heat by sending in faster times than they actually ran, apologizing to me, but acting like, doesn't everyone do that? My dilemma was I wanted a fast time for a high place, but I also wanted to win my heat to prove I deserved to be in the fastest heat. If someone pushed the pace, the results would be fast, but if nobody took the lead, then it would be a tactical race with a kick in the last lap and a slower overall time. Invariably, the one who pushes the pace gets out kicked in the last lap. As it turned out, someone did go out fast for the first mile, but we reeled him in for the second mile. And I hit 5:05, which was right on pace. I needed to average 5:08 per mile to get under 16 minutes. I was itching to make my move as we came into the third mile, but wanted to have something left, so I relaxed and waited. Just before I shot to the lead with 2 laps to go, the announcer, who had been repeating the leader, John Woodcock's leading his name for 6 laps, started announcing the women's javelin winners. When he looked back at our race, he thought I was the Canadian John Woodcock. So there, in my brief moment of glory, sprinting to the finish line, I heard the announcers repeating over and over, John Woodcock is John Woodcock of Canada in the front. John Woodcock, the winner is John Woodcock. I jogged over to where my boys were watching with big smiles on their faces. Happy I won, but more amused that I was with the announcers, more amused than I was with the announcers' mistake. And my first thing my 11-year-old son Riley said was, "Nice race, John Woodcock," causing them both to laugh. Then an overenthusiastic track fan grabbed my hand, shaking vigorously. "Nice race, John, nice race." "My name is not John Woodcock," I responded rather heatedly, causing him to shrink back, looking embarrassed and hurt. "And I'm not from Canada." Needless to say, from that moment on, I became John Woodcock of Canada, the real John Woodcock, who was just 2 seconds behind me, but I didn't meet. Probably almost beat me because the announcer spurring him on. The worst part was I missed breaking 60 minutes by 1.3 tenths of a second. The good news, and this is a stretch, after the finals, I was 8th overall out of 84 in all 5 heats and 3rd American. Plus, I beat the 2 runners who used to false times to get in the fastest heat. That evening, as we entered the cafeteria, I saw Alberto Salazar, best known for winning both Boston and New York City marathons and holding the American records for both the 5K and 10K. He looked at me, held out his hand and said, "Nice race, John." I didn't want to be rude with my kids stifling their giggles, so I shook his hand and just said, "Thanks, Alberto."
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate the story. I found it inspiring. I'm not a runner. I do other forms of sports, but never. I do a little jogging, but nothing that speaks to that. And it's a bit of insight for the viewers into a world either they know or they don't know, and that's what I love about doing the show and hearing your reading. So thank you for that. And let me ask you, first about your writing. How long have you been writing? Like when did you get into writing, either as a profession or just as something that you like to do?
Well, it was back in high school. I was on the wrestling team, and I noticed that the school newspaper they didn't mention wrestling. So I go to the editor and I say, "Hey, you're not covering wrestling." He said, "You want to do it?" I said, "Okay." So next year I became the sports editor. And then, I started in college. I didn't like structural linguistics. I was an English major. And so I liked this idea of taking poetry, how can you grade poetry? You got to have A's, right? So I became a poet and a Milwaukee poet. And we used to give readings, and I had a little magazine called Pretty Mama. And then a friend liked my stuff. And so he made a little book for me. And then I went to college and dropped down, went to San Francisco and became, in Sausalito, I was living on a boat and I was writing poetry and it was being published. And then I went back to college to get my degree. I had dropped out with one credit to go, and I started running, and I started writing about my races, and I ended up having a running column in Willits where I spent half my life, called Footnotes. And probably one of the best compliments, the one compliment I liked was people saying, "I'm not a runner, but I really like your columns." And so I did that for years, and I finally looked back on all this stuff. And I had first book was when I dropped out and went to the Bay Area and lived on a boat. I wrote, that was my first book, came out in 2017. That was called, what was that called? That was called Flashbacks. If you go to Amazon, you'll see Timothy Leary has a book called Flashbacks, but his is an autobiography, mine's a memoir, so you can't get confused. And so now I'm putting together all the writing I did over the years, and this book is going to call A Jog Down Memory Lane, and it should be out. Like I said, it's a neat book, but so.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you
right.
for sharing about that. And how do you find the process of getting your work from, having all these pages in your computer and wherever you store them? How do you find that process from there to putting it together and making it into a book?
Writing is the easy part. Publishing is the tough part. And now I find out, then after publishing finally, I find out that that's about 50% of the job. The other 50% is plugging your book, trying to sell your book.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's not easy, but we do it because we love it, right, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, what happened with me, I came to Hawaii I've been here for 10 years, and I've been meaning to do the writing. I've been still writing stuff, but I just been meaning to put this book together. But then I heard about the Tutu's house, and I would go to Tutu's house, and when I was a newspaper writer, I had a deadline, so I picked Tutu's house to read to the group every week, and that was my deadline. So I'd finish stuff, write new stuff, and just finally, with the help of the people at Tutu's house, when we became the Hawaii Writers Guild, I was one of the founding members, and it just helped me get the book out. I finally got the first book out in 2017, and this one's, out, and paperback's coming out within a week or so. Right.
Well, you bring up a really good point. A lot of the viewers probably don't know what Tutu's house is, and it's a location where people have been meeting for years. It was started by John Holland, who's since crossed to the other side. But he started the writers. I met John. Yeah, I met. Yeah, he started the writers group because he was writing and he wanted some feedback, and it didn't take off right away, but he stuck with it, and it's been going there as a regular place for people to get together and bring their work and ask for feedback and get to hear themselves read out loud for over 10 years. So thanks for bringing that up, because that's a very good point for viewers if they're either new to writing or been doing writing, is to do it. Right now we're doing Zoom groups, where we meet virtually, writers groups, and just to get into it, right, Jim?
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're meeting Zoom today, the same time that we were here, and some of the same people. Dave Fout's been doing it for years.
Yes.
And Ray and Julia Pace, and
let me ask you one other question, which is, of all of the aspects of writing, we have, from the idea to the actual, maybe writing on paper, putting it into the computer, editing it, getting it ready to be published either as an individual, poem or collection. What is your favorite part of that process?
I like to see what I write. I like to see it in print. I like to see it published somewhere.
Yeah.
My favorite part is writing and finishing it, and then, you can over edit. You keep editing, but if you see it published,
So, Jim, I want to thank you for joining Inside the Writer's Studio today and being willing. I know we had our technical challenges, but here we are and here you are, and it gives people the opportunity to see all the different writers. There's so many of us out there. And I want to let people know that if they want to know more about Hawaii Writers Guild, there's a website, hawaiiwritersguild.com. There's a Facebook page, Hawaii Writers Guild. And yeah, until next time, aloha everyone.